The most coveted target for enemy fire today is not a tank. It's a person with a plastic remote hiding in a shattered basement. Up to 90% of all battlefield losses in Ukraine are caused by drones. Tank armadas and textbook assaults from the last century have officially retired. Western media call this a PlayStation-style war, but that's a beautiful lie. The hunt for the operators themselves goes on around the clock. The enemy intercepts your controller's frequency, and immediately everything that can detonate is sent to your basement. However, the concept itself is brilliant. We are witnessing the peak of the Homo sapiens mega project, which has lasted for thousands of years. The entire history of weaponry is the story of our panic-driven phobia of close combat. For centuries, we've thought about only one thing: how to take out the enemy and get as far away from them as possible. The bow, the musket, artillery, and now the FPV drone. How did humanity go from the first arrow to neural networks that learn to kill without orders? Let's figure it out. Let's start with the oldest and most difficult way to kill: close combat. Sword, spear, axe, all of these required you to stand face to face with your opponent and be ready for the fact that in the next second it might be you who dies, not him. Military psychologists who studied the behavior of soldiers in the 20th century recorded a strange phenomenon. Even in the heat of battle, a significant number of people subconsciously tried not to kill directly. They aimed off target, hesitated, or fired into the air. Contact killing turned out to be the most psychologically difficult of all forms of violence invented by humanity. And it seems that this is precisely why humanity began to look for ways to avoid it. The first such method was the bow. It made it possible to kill without having to approach the enemy within arm's reach. And then the crossbow appeared and took things even further. Now even an inexperienced soldier could kill without the years of training required of an archer. This frightened society at the time so much that in 1139 a church council officially banned the use of the crossbow in battles between Christians. The official reason was that such a method of killing was too unknightly, too impersonal. For the first time in history, society tried to legally stop a technology that made killing too easy. It didn't work. The next step was gunpowder and the musket, and that was a real revolution. Now anyone could kill an opponent regardless of strength, height, or years of fencing training. A shot didn't require looking the enemy in the eye. It was enough just to aim in their direction. On the one hand, this democratized war. An army could now be trained quickly. On the other hand, killing became even more impersonal. Then came the machine gun, removing yet another barrier that had previously limited the scale of death. Now a single person could destroy hundreds in just a few minutes. The First World War became the greatest slaughter of its time largely because of this technological leap. Generals were still thinking in terms of cavalry charges and heroic assaults, while the weapons were already operating according to the laws of industrialized death. And it was that same First World War that gave us yet another, even more terrifying step in this evolution: poison gas. On April 22nd, 1915, near the Belgian town of Ypres, the German army used a massive chemical attack with chlorine for the first time. This was a completely different category of killing. The gas did not target a specific person. It killed anyone who happened to be in its path, depending on the direction of the wind. For the first time in history, death ceased to be even theoretically targeted. It became an environment in which the enemy simply found themselves. At the same time, war began to hide the killer not only behind distance, but also behind complete invisibility. German submarines during the First World War sank ships whose crews did not even have time to see who was shooting at them. On May 7, 1915, just such a submarine sank the passenger ship Lusitania, and among the nearly 1,200 dead were American citizens as well. This event later pushed the United States to enter the war. For the first time, the enemy became not just distant, but completely invisible to its victim. Then, the distance became not only horizontal, but also vertical. A pilot dropping bombs from several kilometers up physically cannot see the faces of the people below. And here comes the most important nuance of this entire episode. The less you see the consequences of your actions, the easier it is to carry them out. Distance has ceased to be merely physical. It has become moral. And then humanity invented perhaps the most cold-blooded way to kill of all, the landmine. Its essence lies in the fact that the killer may not even be present at the moment of death. He sets up the device and walks away, while the person who will die may do so weeks or even years later, stepping on ground that appears completely safe. This cruel anonymity so shocked the world that in 1997, dozens of countries signed the Ottawa Convention, which banned anti-personnel mines, and the international movement for this mine ban received the Nobel Peace Prize that same year. History once again repeated the same scenario as with the crossbow 9 centuries ago. Society once again tried to ban a weapon that made death too impersonal, and once again it only partially worked. Russia never joined this convention, and Ukraine, faced with an adversary that follows no rules, withdrew from this agreement itself in 2025 in order to have equal opportunities for defense. And then humanity reached the absolute limit of this entire logic: nuclear weapons. One signature, one button, and entire cities disappear. And the person who made the decision can be thousands of kilometers away from the consequences they have just caused. It would seem that there is no further way to distance a person from the moment of death. And here comes the main unexpected twist of the entire episode. It turns out that the weapon now changing the course of the war in Ukraine is not a new invention of our time at all. The first prototypes of unmanned strike aviation, British and American projects with telling names like Aerial Target and Kettering Bug, appeared back during the First World War more than 100 years ago. It's just that navigation at the time was too primitive to bring the idea to actual combat use. The very term drone, meaning male bee, was born in the 1930s from a British radio-controlled target aircraft with the gentle name Queen Bee. And during the Vietnam War, drones were already being actively used for reconnaissance and even as platforms for launching missiles. So drones are not a revolution that appeared out of nowhere. This is the culmination of a very old story that was simply waiting for technology to finally catch up with it. And now this story has caught up with itself right here in Ukraine. The numbers speak for themselves here. According to Richard Moore, drones are now present literally on every section of the front, and they are responsible for the overwhelming majority of losses. According to Forbes, drones cause up to 75% of all losses and represent the greatest military revolution since the advent of tanks. According to the National Security and Defense Council, Ukrainian FPV drones are responsible for approximately 60% of Russian army losses, and by 2026, the Ukrainian defense industry will be capable of producing over 8 million such drones per year. This figure is unimaginable for any other country engaged in war. The maritime front has followed the same path. The Ukrainian drone Magura 5-5, which carries no people on board, first attacked a Russian reconnaissance ship back in May 2023, and over the following year, a series of similar attacks helped to effectively drive Russia's large fleet out of the western part of the Black Sea. But the most astonishing fact about this section is not about the technology, but about the paradox they have caused. The commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, acknowledged, "The dense drone surveillance so reliably controls a strip about 40 kilometers wide along the front line that any concentration of equipment is instantly detected and destroyed." Therefore, the infantry on both sides is essentially forced to advance on foot, just as they did 100 years ago during the First World War. The most modern robotic war in human history has unexpectedly reverted combat operations to the most primitive tactics of positional confrontation. And there is one more figure that cannot be honestly ignored. According to the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission, in January 2025, small drones, particularly those equipped with first-person view cameras known as FPVs, caused more civilian casualties than any other weapon that month, at least 139 civilians killed and 738 wounded. The distance that was supposed to make war cleaner has, in practice, made it even more unpredictable for ordinary people. Where is this trend leading next? The logical next step is to remove not only the person being killed, but also the one pressing the button. Already now, autonomous systems are being developed around the world that are capable, with the help of algorithms, of independently selecting and attacking targets without human involvement in that specific decision. And here arises the most pressing question that this entire centuries-old history poses to us. If the decision to kill is made not by a human but by an algorithm, who is responsible for it? Drones have not made war more humane. They have made it cheaper, more widespread, and paradoxically, more old-fashioned at the same time. Soldiers are once again sitting in trenches, just like their great-grandfathers did 100 years ago. Only now, above their heads flies something that even the boldest science fiction writers of the last century could not have imagined. For millennia, humanity has tried to push death as far away from its own hands as possible, and every time things became too frightening, society attempted to ban the next weapon, the crossbow, landmines, and now perhaps the turn will come for autonomous systems as well. However, no ban has ever stopped the idea itself. And it seems we have just reached the point where there may be no human hands left in this process at all. That's all from me. Write in the comments whether you think that war without humans on the battlefield will become less brutal or, on the contrary, much more dangerous. I look forward to reading your answers, and we'll see each other in the next episode. Goodbye!